Hello, this is McNair Ezzard, and welcome to A Better World podcast. In each program, we take an in-depth look at the people and organizations, locally, nationally, and internationally, who are working to create a world that works for everyone. And joining us today from Amsterdam, from Share International, are Julian Creme. He's the son of the late British author and artist Benjamin Creme. And also with us is Felicity Eliot, editor of Share International magazine. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
It's good to have you. I appreciate you being with us. Julian, let me ask you, tell us, what is Share International?
Well, it's actually just, in reality, a loose association of groups around the world in many different countries. Groups of individuals, all volunteers, who have responded to Benjamin's information and formed a group to help spread the information. And so it's really just a loose association of groups under an umbrella name. You know, we don't interfere with, no group interferes with the activities of another, but they're all along the same lines.
I see.
Share International, it is actually registered as a foundation in the Netherlands. I believe as a non-profit organization in the United States and as a company in Britain. But these are just, if you like, outward formalities that one needs to have in order to conduct one's business in the world, but actually it's just a loose association of groups.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about who Benjamin Creme was.
Well, he was born in Scotland in 1922. He always wanted to be an artist, studied art in Glasgow, moved to London, but he was also always interested in spiritual matters, in the esoteric, in the Ageless Wisdom teachings, which we'll come back to later in the program. And he was a lifelong student of these teachings in the writings of Blavatsky and Alice A. Bailey. He was in touch with a group of highly evolved men, referred to as the Masters of Wisdom. He was in touch with one of these telepathically from moment to moment. That telepathic contact was developed over a number of years. And then in 1974, Benjamin formed a group in London to carry out the work that we're now doing, have been doing for the last 40 years.
What was in the spiritual field, what was his primary work or the primary message that he sought to share?
Well, his information was that the master of all the masters, the one who fulfills the function of world teacher, is now in the world. It's quite a sort of complex story. It's difficult to grasp it until you have all the necessary bits of information, but all the different major world religions expect the return or the coming of another teacher. And the Ageless Wisdom teachings holds that all these different expected ones are like the Christ, the fifth Buddha, the Imam Mahdi for the Muslims, the Messiah for the Jews, Krishna for the Hindus. All these are different names for the same individual, the world teacher. And Benjamin's information was that the world teacher is now again in the world. That was his primary message. There's a lot of information about the world teacher's work and priorities. For example, he's not, in the first place, primarily a religious teacher. He's an educator in the broadest sense of the word. His primary concerns at the moment are the establishment of the principle of sharing worldwide in economic affairs to bring about a more just and fair world.
Well, why is this Why is this? I mean, Benjamin Creme spent years, I understand, doing this message. Why is this information important for the world to know about?
Well, as we can see, any day, you look at the news and you see that the world is in a terrible state, economically, socially, ecologically. The environment is suffering, and there is a crisis. There are many different crises, in just about every department of our life, and these crises are all stem from a spiritual crisis, which is brought about by the change from one age to another. For the last 2,000 years, we've been living under the influence of the age of Pisces, and we're moving rapidly into the age of Aquarius. And the old energies and ideas of the Piscean age are collapsing. The forms are collapsing. They no longer work. They no longer serve the needs of humanity. And the new ideas of Aquarius, the new energies, are trying to make their presence felt and to find expression in the world. And so the conflict between these two forces, of Pisces on the one hand and Aquarius on the other, forms a critical moment that leads to the spiritual crisis, and that leads to all the many different crises in all departments of life. And this is important. The information is important because it explains what's going on and shows the way forward.
Is the information, what's the best word to say? Is it doomsday kind of message, or is it a more hopeful message for humanity?
It's absolutely not a doomsday message. Absolutely a message of hope. World teacher, his actual name Maitreya, is known to the Buddhists as Buddha Maitreya, fifth Buddha, expected to come about now. Maitreya's message is certainly one of hope. His job is to lead humanity. They won't do it for us. We have to do it. But he and the masters will guide us, advise us as to what we need to do to solve the crises in the world. And at the very basis of that advice will be that we need to share among all nations the resources of the world, so that every living human being has at least the bare essentials for a dignified life. Everybody, for example, everybody needs to eat. Everyone needs adequate food. They need shelter. They need access to healthcare and education. And these four priorities will be what Maitreya will be talking about, and the need to bring this about, what he will be talking about in the first place. Also, the need to save the environment. We have very little time left before the environmental state of the world tips over into quite unknown territory with global warming.
Yeah, a lot of people would say we're already at that precipice, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, yes. But it's very much a message of hope.
Felicity, let me ask Felicity about Share International magazine. Can you tell us about the purpose, how it started, and so on?
Yes, I'd be delighted to tell you about it, because it is precisely that message of hope that you've just been talking about. Share International magazine came into being in 1982, and it's been going all these years without the help and support of anything like commercials and so on, because we wanted to be free of commercial pressure. And it is literally the voice of the future, the voice of hope. What we set out to do is to present to the world all the needed changes and ideas for those changes. So, for example, the sort of articles that we have would be talking exactly about what you and Julian have just mentioned, which is, the changes that need taking place in all aspects of our lives. So starting with the environment, looking at poverty, hunger, marginalization, the refugee crisis, and so on. How do all of these crises come about? Well, as Julian suggested, because of the breakdown of our civilization, which is normal at the end of a cycle, and that's where we are right now. We're at the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new one. And Share International is the voice of that new time. So what we bring to our readers is a sense of what's possible, new possibilities, and the need for change. So we look at things like environmental issues, and we're able, luckily, to present often very well-known people, very well-known writers and so on. We're able to use their articles through a syndicated service. And also we get permission to reprint articles. So, for example, you have just recently a summary of something by Naomi Klein or Bill McGibbon, a well-known environmentalist. We often we have printed articles by Jeffrey Sachs looking at social injustice and the need for change. So, yes, that's, of course, you know that the magazine was started by Benjamin Creme in 1982 under, I think probably a hint from his master with whom he was in contact telepathically, constantly. And Benjamin at the time was helped. Julian and I were also part of the editorial team right in the beginning. But thanks to someone, a Dutch journalist called Peter Liefhebber, the magazine got its really good basic structure. And Peter Liefhebber did a very good job actually sort of giving the magazine a good start. And of course, what's unique about the magazine is, and I have to say it is absolutely a unique magazine, is that for all of this time, until very recently, a master of wisdom, Benjamin Creme's master, wrote an article every month for the magazine.
Let me ask you, do you, with this information in the magazine and such, do the different religions, what do they have to say about it? Do you ever get any pushback from them, especially the more conservative people?
I think that what we would say is, first of all, of course, we're not here to convert people. This is not a religion, simply to provide information. And it's up to people to see whether it chimes with what they believe and what they long for the world. Now, as for other religions, it tends to be the extremists in all fields, not only religious, by the way, who find this sort of information difficult. But, it's up to them, and time will tell, and people will have various experiences which will convince them that this is indeed something that is real, that is happening, that they're experiencing, and that opens the doors to a completely new way of relating to each other, forming a new kind of society worldwide, which includes everyone and gives everyone, as Julian mentioned, the opportunity to live a dignified life and to explore his or her own creativity, to develop as the spiritual beings that we all are.
Share International contained information I was reading about something called the Ageless Wisdom Teachings. Could you tell us briefly what those are about?
Yeah, the Ageless Wisdom Teachings are basically the combined and accumulated knowledge, wisdom, insight, intuition, which is accrued over the millennia, over decades of centuries and centuries and centuries. This is the wisdom that the masters know and are, let's say, stewards of or protectors of. And this information has been known, it is as old as humanity. It's more than information, it is the insight into what reality is. There's not a single human being, I believe, who hasn't asked themselves, what am I here for? Ask the big questions. And it is the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, what we can call the eternal verities, which answer these questions. So it's the repository of the wisdom and insight of the ages. And this has always been known. The masters have known this information and have gradually, each time and every time that humanity is ready to accept another and be able to deal with, work with, and use, that's the important thing, use the next bit of information, the next bit of teaching, the new insight, the masters would bring this forward and allow it to come out and become exoteric, known in the world. Mm-hmm. And that is what the work has been of disciples throughout the world in their various ways. And if you think about some of the great names throughout history, these have always been disciples, conscious or unconscious disciples. They may have known that they were disciples, or they might have been working simply as they would have believed from their own intuition, their own souls. And they would, through their work, whether it's scientific, artistic, social, religious, philosophical, they would bring forward into the world, make exoteric, some new facet of the ageless wisdom teachings. And that is certainly the work of Blavatsky, Bailey, Helena Rurich, and so on, all the great teachers who have brought that sort of information to the world. Of course, Blavatsky was the one who first brought the idea of the masters and how they work to the Western world.
So, Julian, are these masters? Are there any of them in the world now? I know you mentioned the world teacher is here, but what about the masters? And if they're in the world, why haven't we seen them?
Oh, yes, a number of them are in the world. At the moment, living incognito, but up to recently, when I say recently, the last few decades, most of the masters have lived in remote mountain and desert areas of the world. That is, those who have living in physical bodies. They're not all in physical bodies. They can manifest at will. But some have been living, if you like, in the modern world, in or near cities and so on. There are some examples. The one we know is the Master Jesus, who was the disciple Jesus in Palestine 2,000 years ago. He is living on the outskirts of Rome.
So are they? How long are they? I mean, is there a plan for how long they'll be living among us?
From now on, that is, until whenever. I mean, for millennia to come. They and Maitreya also will be with us outwardly in a physical body and known to the public, known to the world for the coming 2,500 years. So yes, from now on.
I understand, from the magazine and studying the information that the world teacher was supposed to have come out really to the world way back in 1982. What happened that he didn't come out, and what's been happening since then with regards to his coming out?
The hope was there was an opportunity, there was a window of opportunity in 1982, and the hope was that Maitreya would be able to emerge and acknowledge himself worldwide. But it required an invitation from humanity. The masters, this brings in the question of free will. Humanity has free will, and that free will may not be infringed by the masters or by Maitreya. It is sacrosanct. Much as we may wish them to infringe it by coming out, they cannot do that. So it requires they can take a step towards us, but we must also, humanity, must also take a step towards them and invite them to come before the world. And in 1982, it was hoped that the media would take up the story and via the linked television networks invite Maitreya to speak to the world. That didn't happen. The media, I'm not blaming journalists in saying this, but it's a natural response, I think. But the media did not take up the story to the extent that was hoped. And so it was not possible for Maitreya to come forward without infringing human free will. So he decided to take a longer route, appearing gradually, appearing to groups, religious groups and other groups around the world. So it's been a slower process. Beginning in 2010, he took up a long-standing invitation to appear on an American television channel, which he did incognito, not announced as Maitreya, as the world teacher, but simply someone, a wise man, talking about issues that affect us all. There were a whole series of such interviews, and then he moved on to other countries, and he's done similar thing in a number of other countries since then, over the years. Mm-hmm. And gradually his ideas, the need for sharing and justice, these ideas are gradually taking hold on the public consciousness, shall we say. And so you see the growth of movements calling for social justice around the world as a result of this. But the hope is that that the call for this will soon be strong enough. The invocative call from humanity will be strong enough for him to declare himself.
So there's no set date at this point about when we might see him.
Well, Benjamin said the time is known, but the specific date, the timing of it, the precise timing of it depends on humanity. It's up to humanity to demand the sort of changes that he's talking about. When that demand is strong enough, he will be able to come out. So, and he himself, the masters, they know the window of opportunity, but the precise timing depends on humanity.
Welcome back. This is McNair Ezard, and I'm your host for A Better World. And today our guests are Julian Creme and Felicity Eliot with Share International in Amsterdam. Julian is the son of the late British author and artist Benjamin Creme, and Felicity Eliot is the current editor of Share International magazine. Felicity, what's it been like for people like yourself throughout the years waiting for Maitreya to come before the world? How have you stayed motivated?
Yeah, what I was wanting to say actually, I think that I'd like to emphasize something which is a roundabout way of answering your question, and that is what we're actually talking about is evolution. We're actually talking about the evolution of this planet and everything on it, and particularly human consciousness. So we're not just talking about sort of an event or something time related and so on. Yes, it is related to time, and yes, it is related to the cycles and development of our planet and our planet's position within the solar system and so on and so on. But really we're talking about evolution and the evolution of, as I said, consciousness. And if you know that this story is really to do with that, to do with the development of absolutely everything we know and everything we understand and don't understand and what we call reality, it takes on a different aspect. You have a different perspective on things. Now, a number of people ask me, well, how come you're still going and how come this whole work is still going? And there are people who've been now, Julian and I have been doing the work for more than 40 years now. You see, the thing is, how come the story is still going? Well, it's still going because it's real, because it is real, and the masters are real, and they are absolute, what Benjamin Creme always used to say about them, the masters, is that they're opportunists and that they respond, I think, almost I don't know, but literally sort of on the minute, at the minute, they respond to events and changes in the world and to developments in human consciousness and so on. And so the story has continued and still has its power, still has its magnetism, because you see people are still join us, are interested in our information, want to know about it. And it's because it's real and it has the power and the energy of the masters of the wisdom and Maitreya behind it, because it is to do with the development of, actually, I'm going to say something sort of, it's going to sound huge, but it's actually to do with the development of the consciousness of that life who gives life to this planet. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So it's really far more than simply, some people arriving at some time to do something nice which might change the world somewhat. This is really to do with us stepping into a completely different way of being in ourselves and changing so that we realize and actually live the reality, the inner reality. And the inner reality is that we are actually sparks of God or divine beings. We're actually gods in incarnation, did we but know it, as Benjamin always used to say. And we're talking about a process of change and development, very slow, but from now on, it will be speeded up enormously. So, but you asked me a question, and I'm going to try and go back to now, which is, how has it been all this time to go on and stay motivated? I stay motivated simply by the fact that I've had over the years extraordinary experiences, and I know it to be true from an inner intuition. The very first time I heard this information, I knew it to be true instantly. It was as if I had a checklist in my head and everything figured, it was just right. I knew it to be right. However, I decided also to give it all the powers of my critical, intelligent approach to it, and just gave it time to see, does it add up? Does it reach and does it meet my highest requirements, my highest principles? And yes, it did. So it's a question of experience, it's intuition, and above all, I think it is the experience of having worked with Benjamin, seeing him with his master, understanding the relationship somewhat, in any case somewhat, his relationship with his master, and seeing how the masters work. And of course, having the experience of the master and his help in our own lives, and having had experiences of Maitreya and the Master Jesus and so on. Mm-hmm. These all help. So it isn't a question of keeping motivated. It simply is, that's my reality. That's our reality. And I see signs of the world changing, and I see signs of the world needing to change. I'm sure we all do. The minute you turn on your television, you see it.
Yes. I want to kind of move into, for both of you, some of the teachings which you touched on at the beginning of the interview, Julian. In looking through some of Benjamin Creme's books and the magazine, he talked about the need for countries of the world to turn away from war as a means of solving our problems, and certainly here, especially in the United States, where I think a lot of us are very acutely aware of the potential for that between us and certain countries of the world right now. Can you comment a little bit about this need to do away with war?
Well, you could say that the purpose of life is to bring all the aspects of creation into alignment. And from the point of view of humanity at the moment, we have to realize that we're not just individual personalities who are born and live for some decades and then disappear. We are actually a divine, each of us is a divine spiritual being. There is a spiritual aspect to life. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about a spiritual aspect to life. We are, each of us, a divine soul in incarnation. and all souls are one with every other soul. Humanity is one. So you can't express, humanity can't express the divine nature of itself if it's destroying, if people are destroying each other through war. It is absolutely essential that we relinquish the desire for war.
I mean, because if we have a war now, I mean, it would probably mean the destruction of everything, wouldn't it? Especially if it were a nuclear war.
If it was a nuclear war, it would destroy all life on the planet and make the planet uninhabitable for millions and millions of years.
Felicity, let me ask you about, earlier Julian mentioned the idea of sharing the world's resources. And it's hard to imagine that those of us living under the current economic system of capitalism, per se, will ever accept this idea of sharing. I would think it's going to be a dramatic shift from business as usual. Probably get a lot of pushback from those who hold the economic and political power.
Yeah, that's true. On the other hand, what is growing throughout the world, two things I'd like to talk about. One is people power, and we see that more and more throughout the world. People are demanding their rights, and a huge number of crises are being created because of social injustice. Just to name one, we can talk about the refugee crisis, both in the East with the Rohingya refugees and also the refugees that we see flooding into Europe from Africa and the Middle East. That's one aspect of it. The other thing is that many people of goodwill, intelligent people who are starting to look and look at the system, analyze it and see that it is failing, are beginning to come up with intelligent, viable, and that's important, viable solutions. One of which is, for example, a universal basic income. Now, this is gaining ground as an idea throughout the world. So people are starting to look at new systems and see how they can be fitted into and maybe sort of figure out a transition phase from rampant capitalism, which is so unjust and leaves so many million people, so many billions of people marginalized and without hope, to transition to a world which would be fairer and more just. As Julian mentioned, of course, the masters are not coming to do it for us. But what Maitreya has said is that he knows that humanity will respond. And akin to that, I would also like to say something else. It's a well-known expression within, let's say, the New Age circles and in philosophical ideas that when the disciple is ready, the master will come. Now, in this case, we can extrapolate from that and say humanity is ready, and therefore the masters are here now. Not a moment too soon, obviously, but here at a time when humanity is responsive enough, open enough, and it is so clear. If you look at, as you know very well in the States at the moment, and in the UK, we know it because of the crazy idea of Brexit. Here in Europe, you have the sort of unraveling of many of the systems, for example, the European Union, and the move towards the right. And of course, you've got, on the other hand, shoring up by central banks of their economic and financial systems. But as you see, humanity is being faced with a choice, and it is so clear. We see so clearly what we shouldn't be doing. I think that's particularly clear in the States at the moment, don't you think?
Definitely. I mean, it seems to be the line of demarcation seems to be so clear.
Yeah. And this is what Maitreya's energy does. He releases into the world his energy. It's actually called the energy of love, and that it is but a completely different understanding from the normal definition of love. It is an energy which stimulates both the, let's say, tendency towards the good and the tendency towards the negative. And that is why we're seeing at the moment the world so divided, but it's so clear what we have to choose. And that is also hopeful. because more and more people see now what we have to do. And what we have to do is really bring in changes that will do away with the extraordinary imbalance that we have in the world. There's such an imbalance in the, what is it, eight families? 8 families in the whole world own everything, something like that.
Right.
I mean, I don't have the figures to hand, but it's an extraordinary imbalance, as we all know.
Yeah.
So we have to change, and so many of us know now we have to change. So what we're talking about, and Benjamin was talking about what Share International stands for, is really to do with, as I said before, evolution and not revolution. I mentioned people power, but I don't mean it in the sense of a revolution. We don't want to, as they say, chuck the baby out with the bathwater, but you do want to keep all of the best of the past and the present, but you want to look together at new systems. Mm-hmm. So you have new political forms starting, and we've seen it in the Occupy movement, Nuit Debout in France, Podemos in Spain, various, around the world, there have been various forms of people power that rise and then are possibly not sustainable in the current forms that they take. But that's such an interesting thing to look at. How to sustain people power. But I think it is beginning to be self-sustaining, because there's a constant, you see almost every weekend, people are out on the streets demanding their rights for something or the other, whether it's more pay, more justice, Black Lives Matter, whatever it is, people are out demanding their rights.
It seems that a lot of our world problems continue to be problems because so many of us are complacent and most people don't like change. Are we more interested in maintaining the status quo than we are in making the changes that will make our world a better place? I mean, is there anything we can do to rouse each other out of what seems to be a complacency?
It's a lovely question. I can't speak for all of us, can I? But I think that more and more people are waking up to the fact that the world cannot go on as it is. You know, take a taxi ride, ask your cab driver, ask everyone you meet on the streets and people you talk to around the world, and everyone says it cannot go on like this. It's a crazy world. What are we doing? So whereas there is a tendency towards complacency, I'm sure, in all of us, nevertheless, the crises facing us and the images on our television screens are so appalling that we can no longer permit ourselves that complacency. And complacency is actually based on a sort of a fallacy. It's, again, a sort of a wrong identification and a wrong sense of what the reality of our existence is. You know, complacency is based on an idea of we're separate. So, you know, if I'm okay, it's okay. But we're learning through quantum physics. We're learning through modern technology and the world's communication networks and so on. We're learning that we are actually not separate from each other. And what happens to one, or what happens in one place or part of the universe, has an effect somewhere else. We know this from science. We know it from our everyday reality of just our television and our social media networks and so on. And we are beginning to have far more sense of our interdependence. Charles Eisenstein talks about, he uses a very beautiful word, I think. He talks about a word and he uses interbeingness. And I believe that is more and more the experience, the direct experience of millions of people now. And Maitreya, the world teacher, has said that there are now something like, and I think Benjamin Creme's masters as well, people are ready for change. They're demanding change. That is why the masters are here, as I said before. That interbeingness is being experienced. And now there are something like 4 to 5 million people who are standing on the verge, on the threshold of a new step into a different kind of consciousness. That will speed up our development as the human race enormously. And I think everyone these days has a sense of life has speeded up and that things are changing at an enormous rate. And we have to make decisions that will be radical, but provide a more real, viable basis for a just society.
Julian, are there any final thoughts you have about this story that you think it's important for us to know about?
Any final thoughts about this, the whole thing?
Yeah.
Well, if it's true, of course we believe it is, then it's clearly the most important event in the history of this planet, certainly for the last 100,000 years or so. It will bring humanity into a completely new understanding of itself, of its relationship to the planet and the universe, and set it on a path back to its source. It's that all-encompassing. More than that, I don't think I can say.
One question, Felicity, that came to mind is, with Benjamin Creme no longer with us, is there somebody that's his successor? I mean, what's happening with that?
I'm very pleased that you asked that, and a number of people have asked that. And one person who asked it to Benjamin Creme himself, a number of years before he died. Benjamin Creme died, by the way, in 2016 in October. But he was asked in about 2014 by a journalist who was interviewing him, who would be his successor? And Benjamin Creme's answer was, first of all, to give a light-hearted laugh and to say, well, of course, all the thousands of people who work with me, they know what to do. The people in the groups have worked with me for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They know the story. They know the information. They know what their task is, and they're perfectly capable of carrying it out. And he said he would happily leave it to us, all of those who wish to take this work on themselves and to carry on as they have been. And that was his answer. So the answer is, there's a sort of collective John the Baptist, as it were, these days. So there's no fear about transition and who's going to take over and will everything collapse because Benjamin Creme is not here. We're all adult disciples. We're stepping into that role, into the world. We have been for many years, many of us, and we know what to do. So there should be no qualms, no worries about this. The work continues, and I have no doubt that the masters have everything in hand and have other plans as well. And there may be other people. The work continues, and there may be other people who have a contact in one way or another and who can bring new insight into it. So I have no fear that the masters know what they're doing. And the thousands, I think there are about 4,000 of us around the world, they know their tasks, they take them seriously, they're committed, and as keen as ever.
So real quick, how can people get some more information about this?
Well, there's the Share International website, primarily. It's share-international.org, and via that you can find links to sister sites in various languages, and that's the best place to start.
Okay. Listen, I want to thank you for being with us today, Julian Creme and Felicity Eliot with Share International in Amsterdam. It's been a very interesting show, so thank you for being with us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
We've come to the end of another program here on A Better World podcast, a program that looks at the people and organizations who are working to make a positive difference in our world. This is McNair Ezzard. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next time on A Better World.